Hi everyone. Today I will be joining Marco channel. He's given me an authority to introduce him, Marco. And also Rich, the boutique director, is here today. And today we'll be talking about famous Gérald Genta, overrated or underrated.
Oof, this is a good question. I mean, for me, he's Italian, so he's underrated. He doesn't get enough credit. Not only is he Italian, he designed the Nautilus, the Royal Oak, and the Ingenue, just to name three. I don't know how you can say he's overrated. And I get it, there's a lot of hype, there's a lot of woohoo with the name, and you're always comparing any integrated bracelet to him. But the fact that you're comparing any integrated bracelet to him, I don't think you can say he's underrated. That's my 2 cents.
Okay. What about yourself, Arena?
You know what? I really like Genta design, and I think the most famous watches in stainless steel and sport watches got introduced by him. So I think he's underrated as well, because there's a lot of people who doesn't know Genta as us as we do when you're in the watch industry. What about you?
Yeah, I mean, I think I would take a little bit of what you both said. I wouldn't say he's underrated or overrated. I think he's perfectly rated, right? I think most people recognize how important he has been for the watch industry, right? Obviously, we talk about the Ingenue, we talk about, obviously, the Royal Oak, the Patek Philippe Nautilus, but there's so many other designs that people don't talk about, right? The Omega Constellation. Mm-hmm. Obviously, it's not the same like it was when it was originally designed by Gérald Genta, but you have the Globemaster lineup, which is kind of the natural extension of it, right? Just because the Constellation, by modern standards, it wouldn't be a good selling watch, right? So the Constellation kind of keeps the Globemaster rather kind of keeps the same design elements of the Constellation, but it's kind of updated to the 21st century. You look at the Cartier Pasha, right? That was also designed by Gérald Genta. The Bulgari Octo is another one that was designed by Gérald Genta, and even famous lines, iconic lines that weren't designed by Genta were inspired by Genta. So if you guys are familiar with the Cartier crash, now everybody has heard the story that it was supposedly a baignoire that was in a car crash and it melted on the dash of the actual car. But the thing is there's never been an actual serial model replica, or like the actual watch has never been found, and the original mold that they took has never been produced by Cartier. So if they really had that mold, they would have kept it, right?
Sure.
The idea is that at the time, the owner of Cartier was upset at Gérald Genta because he was working with Bulgari creating the Octo, and so he created a kind of Genta-like design, inspired by Salvador Dali, obviously, but it was like the fact that he was working with Bulgari, he was really upset about, created that incredible design. Now it's an icon in the watch industry today. So obviously, I don't think he's underrated, overrated. I think he's perfectly rated. What do you think about that?
I think you hit the nail on the head. But I do think, you definitely say he's underrated, simply for the fact that pretty much everything to his design when you're looking at
100%.
A sports model. I mean, I think most people are, whether you want the Royal Oak or the Nautilus, people want one of those two watches, right?
Right.
And I think, the Daytona's in that same category, a different watch altogether with a different heritage. But, his name is constantly brought up.
Oh, 100%.
I mean, we're going back to, I believe he was originally a jewelry designer, which is why he approached watches from a different angle.
He was an artist.
I know that he painted a lot, yeah.
He painted a ton.
And he painted most of his, and did a lot of sketches.
Yep, absolutely.
And, I think Sotheby's, they auctioned them off. Yeah, pretty cool. Yep. But he came at watch design from the jewelry side, not a watch side. Yep. You know what I mean? Which is why I think, he perfected the integrated bracelet, because he actually made it is a piece of jewelry on the wrist, opposed to just a, utilitarian wristwatch.
Totally.
So if I'll ask two of you, what's your favorite 3 Genta designs? Like, which one do you choose, each of you?
It's hard to. So I'm going to throw an oddball out there because it's hard not to pick Patek Philippe Nautilus, Ingenue, and Royal Oak.
Sure.
Mm-hmm. One other watch that he designed is for Universal Genève. Now most people know about the pull router, but there's actually another one. Called the Shadow. The Shadow is actually what inspired the Patek Philippe Ellipse. So it's also an integrated bracelet watch, but with the ellipse shape. It was actually originally introduced by Universal Genève and then later adapted by Patek Philippe. So I'm going to choose that, and then I have to go between the Royal Oak and the Nautilus. I'm a bigger fan of the Royal Oak personally, and then between the Nautilus and the Ingenue, how can you not pick Patek Philippe? So it's kind of like, it's just like those are my 3, but Ingenue obviously beats the Shadow, but I think it's a cool pick. It's also another really underrated Genta design.
Well, here, let me ask you a question, because I know that you're partial to the 5711. would the Nautilus exist without a Royal Oak?
Probably not, because Royal Oak was designed first, and then he designed Nautilus.
I mean, because you think about it, it is a different watch, a different
Very
bracelet,
different
you know, but you can see the similarities.
Sure.
You know, in the bezel, in the integrated bracelet, like I don't know that we would have a Nautilus and an Ingenieur if we didn't have the Royal Oak.
But I feel like Ingenieur and Royal Oak, I mean, it's very similar. The bezel has the screws,
screws on the
Nautilus, and they designed in 2 years in between each other. Nautilus have a smooth bezel, there is no screws.
Yeah.
So I would say IWC and Royal Oak, like
Are closer than
they're like two twins with, you know, different delivery time.
I mean, the interesting part is I think the GPU Laureato was done in 73, right? And the design of the bracelet kind of is reminiscent of the Patek Philippe Nautilus, but the Nautilus came later, right?
Sure.
So it was like kind of like which came first, the chicken or the egg, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, listen, at the time they were all inspired by the same watch, right? It's like saying all the dive watches in the world look like a Rolex Submariner, but they're all dive watches. You know, they all have like a similar aesthetic. They're all inspired by the same kind of thing. For me, Genta, I think what underpins Genta is the artisanship of his design, right? Even you look at his later models, like his own personal brand, even Gérald Charles, for example.
Sure.
Right? When you look at Gérald Genta's design, the number one thing is they're so wacky, so out there. Now, the Royal Oak today doesn't seem like it's that crazy of a design, but
But at the time, it was revolutionary.
of course. I mean,
Yeah.
you go back to 1972, height of the quartz crisis, the watch market is dying.
Sure.
And people think quartz is the future. And what does Audemars Piguet do? They hire some guy named Gérald Genta to design a watch that's going to take them into the 21st century. And for the time, it was a raging success. But it wasn't the case. Like the Nautilus was a big failure for a long time. I mean, they produced it for 20 years, but I think the original 3700, I don't know the exact numbers in steel, but in gold, they only made 1200, I think.
Sure.
In yellow gold, which
Yeah.
for a 20-year production span is nothing, like
Yeah.
for Patek Philippe, right? Obviously, they're hand-making watch, but still, it's not a huge number. That means that they
But
just
that was a
weren't-
point in time where people were still buying dress watches, high
Absolutely.
complications, grand
Absolutely.
comps, annual calendars.
right. I mean, the engineer.
You were
we
buying
talked-
Patek for what Patek
but
was.
We even talked
So
about the
that's
engineer being a total bust, right? You
Yeah.
mentioned the fact that they made how many? 600 total? or something
Honestly,
like
I
that?
think it's like under 500,
Right.
450 something. I mean, it's insane.
Right.
And that was for years.
Absolutely. So we take his design for granted, but now I think the underpinning of what made Gérald Genta so special was how revolutionary a designer he was, and he was such a bold risk taker. Like his Gérald Genta watches don't really speak to me, especially like those octagonal shaped watches.
Sure.
But like the engineering, the movement, finishing, the prowess that a lot of these watches have, it was insane. He wasn't a watchmaker by trade, but he certainly was creating some of the best watches out there for the time, no doubt about it.
Well, you know what's interesting is, and I never really thought about this till right now, you know, if you're in the industry or
Yeah.
a watch lover, I would say he's a household name.
Sure.
I can't think of a single other watch designer that's not a watchmaker
household name.
that's a household name.
Yeah.
I can't name one.
No, I can't either. What's been cool also is that so LVMH bought out Gérald Genta, so they own
Sure.
the Gérald Genta brand now. Now they've been doing a lot of like really cool stuff with LV specifically.
Sure.
I'm really interested to see what's the future of the Gérald Genta brand. I know they're going to get to it at some point. They've been focused mostly on LV and Daniel Roth
Yeah.
for the time being. But would you like to see like the old complication, maybe the retrogrades? Even they made those like old wacky like Donald Duck watches,
Golfing and stuff? Yeah, where the
I always
arms-
thought those were so cool, so
Yeah.
unique. Would you guys?
And there's a very niche collectible market for
it's
those.
a huge collectible market, absolutely. Because you get the master's work. That's the idea.
Yeah.
Right? Would you guys like to see that reintroduced?
You know, I'm not sure actually. I would like to go see more in depth of his, but most of his collection, I enjoy what is available right now.
Yeah.
I don't know how you feel about, but he did a lot, like especially when his designs were auctioned a couple years ago before LVMH purchased them. I think the best is out already.
Yeah,
That's how I
you
feel.
think so? Like
I do. I
Nautilus, you
feel
think?
it's
Yeah.
already out, but and there's a few designs that like. Obviously Cartier Pasha, but nobody talking about like none of you ever.
But they don't
spoke
even make the
about
Pasha
Cartier.
anymore, right?
No.
I don't think so. It's not
But
a
they
model.
did.
But you
And
know,
it's
it's a
not the-
unique watch. You know how it has like the
Yeah.
screw down
Sure.
cap on the crown with the cabochon sapphire, and the way that the lugs have like the kind of the pins, the anchors on both.
Yeah.
It's just very unique.
That
you
watch
know.
was super hot like 20 years ago.
It was. It
Yes.
was. Yeah. I mean, the thing about Gérald Genta is right, and people will say, well, he's only known for 3 designs, but you only need two, you only need one, really.
Right?
You
Yeah.
know, you
Well,
only
to
need-
my point, name another watch designer that's not a watchmaker.
Absolutely.
Name one.
And that's the thing. You can make a sincere, concrete argument that Gérald Genta is one of the most important watch people in the history of watchmaking. I mean, I would think Breguet, I can make an argument for Breguet, John Arnold, who made like old school marine chronometers, which
Sure.
was super important for like world exploration. You know, you can throw Thomas Mudge, who did the Swiss lever escapement, which is used pretty much in all the watches today, perpetual calendar. Who else is there? George Daniels with the coaxial escapement, maybe F.P. Jorn. Gérald Genta is probably more important than maybe both of those people because he helped literally revive the entire industry out of something that was, you know, seen as devastating. Like it was going to kill the entire industry.
And too, you think about it, what would have happened to AP and Patek if those two watches weren't released?
I mean, we'll never know, right?
Right.
I think Patek would have still been okay.
I do too.
But I think modern Audemars Piguet would have been a totally different landscape because you think about it, AP was as well known for their high complication pieces, perpetual calendars, chronographs.
Completely gone.
And they were actually one of the biggest makers of repeaters, minute repeaters.
Sure.
They were, I think, one of the biggest, like in terms of like numbers, the highest numbers like in terms of production, right? So the most units they actually created. And yet nowadays you see none of that.
No.
It's what, 80% Royal Oak?
I know.
And even the Code 1159 can't even escape the Royal Oak. It has the Royal Oak mid-case.
I know. Yeah.
Right? So it's like, what would AP be?
He changed the landscape of that entire company.
Oh, 100%. But yeah, it's interesting to think about. He may be one of the most pivotal, like if you make your Mount Rushmore most important watch people of all time, he could easily have an argument. And yet he never made a single movement.
Yeah,
I think that's pretty cool.
I do too.
So does that make him overrated? Because people care about, or sorry, does that make him underrated rather? Because people maybe don't realize the impact that he's had? I don't know. There's a real argument that could be made.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I'm not a big hype guy, a big bandwagon guy for me, and not just because he's Italian. I have to say, Gérald Genta is underrated and deserves even more respect than he gets.
What about you, Irina?
No, well, now that we have that conversation, I have to agree with Rich. I think he is underrated.
Right?
But he is, you're right, he didn't design a single movement.
He did not make a
everything we talk
single
about,
movement.
there's so many wonderful watchmakers, and everything we talk about is his design.
Yeah, it's incredible to think about, especially because, listen, watch industry is an old industry, right?
Totally.
It's been around for, I mean, if you go back to clocks, thousands of years, right? If you go back to sundials, tens of thousands of years. But the idea is like, there's not much true innovation. The only thing you can really change is
At
design.
this point, yeah.
And he's the greatest designer ever.
But too, I think it's fair to say this. The watch world was completely different in the early, mid, and late 70s than it is today. Because at that point in time, no one cared if a watch had an in-house movement.
Right.
I mean, the Nautilus and the Royal
Both
Oak
use
had
a
a JLC movement.
Yeah, JLC
you know?
920.
I mean, JLC is the watchmaker's watchmaker for a reason. I mean, they supplied everyone with movements. No one cared about that.
It was a different standard.
But that's a different, that's a new kind of.
It's the last 10 years. Yeah,
you know, I would
100%.
say, was this an in-house movement? I mean, people didn't even know what that meant 15 years ago.
Right, exactly.
You know? I mean, so I think you can't judge a watch released in the 70s with today's standards of what we have to have today.
Sure.
It was a different landscape, a different world. People didn't care about that.
Yeah.
But let me
Truly,
ask you a
right?
question.
No, they really did.
Do you feel that clients care about Genta design, or they just see
It is 100%
Audemars
is
Piguet,
selling.
they just see a
100%
Royal Oak, they
is
just see a
selling.
Pasha?
Because I feel you can know
it's-
nothing about watches, and you probably know enough to know that he designed the Royal Oak and the Nautilus. You probably don't know that he designed the Ingenieur unless you actually know watches, you know, or any of the other watches that we
Pasha and
talked about.
Constellation, yeah.
But at the end of the day, those are really the only two watches you to know to be able to fake a conversation.
Oh,
and, you know,
100%.
get involved or say, man, do you know?
Yeah,
It's like
if you
saying,
know-
oh, Jordan and Kobe.
If you know nothing else about watches other than like Submariner, Daytona, then you know most definitely you know Gérald Genta and you know Nautilus and Royal Oak. You have to. It's become synonymous with the watch industry at this point. It's an interesting conversation. Listen, I love Genta. I think he's perfectly rated. But I think this conversation you can easily make the argument that he's totally underrated for sure.
Yeah. Sounds like we all agree, right?
Yeah, I think so.
I think we're all agreeing. I think we have to ask our viewers, our market
Yeah.
viewers, what do you guys think about? And comment below, what do you think, is Genta overrated or underrated?